I knew something was off the moment I walked into that leadership huddle. Vanya looked right through me like I was just another disposable tool in her inbox. Useful, maybe, but not worth remembering. She didn't ask my name. Didn't care. Just tossed out, "We'll sunset the old systems fast." Like I was a wall she couldn't wait to tear down. And everyone else? They just nodded and smiled like they'd already carved my name into a farewell cake and moved on with their day. 12 years. That's how long I held that company together. Like a spine keeping everything upright. My title was Business Systems Director. But that barely scratched the surface. I created the protocols that kept our global warehouses from toppling over each other. Built routing logic that sliced millions off our shipping delays. Approved every API handshake, license exchange, and trust certificate. I wasn't the flashy type. Never played politics. Never kissed up at fancy dinners. But when the warehouse went down in Osaka or shipments jammed in Rotterdam, my phone rang. Not Vanya's. Not the CTO's. Mine. Then Marshall stepped down. The founder. The one guy who actually read the architecture reports. That's when Vanya swept in, grinning like a product launch and flashing her Harvard MBA like a cop flashing a fake badge. She came in with glossy slides that said recalibrate, replatform, reimagine. And my gut? It just said, get out. She brought her own crew. A baby-faced CTO from some failing startup, and an executive assistant who called herself a time architect. I'm not kidding. Real quick, before we go any further, if you're even thinking of skipping the rest of this story, hit the like button and subscribe. Only 3% of you ever do, but it really helps us keep these stories going. The kind execs pray never make it out into the wild. Back to it. Vanya didn't ask how things worked. Just assumed everything was powered by good vibes and Gmail. Wanted to wipe the whole system clean like this was a school project, not a network running global logistics. What she didn't know, what no one bothered to ask, was that the real heart of our infrastructure was a predictive load balancer we called Map-in Core. And here's the kicker. Narelian didn't technically own it. Not directly. Years ago, I convinced Marshall to wrap the core algorithm inside a custodial trust. Set it up through a Delaware LLC, built in with digital safeguards and security certificates. Why? Because we got burned once. A board member tried to license out our system to a third party behind Marshall's back. After that, Marshall came to me and said, "How do we lock this down for good?" So I built a digital vault, named myself the trustee, and buried the key under layers of compliance only I could access. This wasn't about ego. It was about protecting what mattered. That vault still existed. The registrar still listed me. And the entire licensing chain, Map-in's backbone, ran through a digital escrow with my name stamped right on it. Vanya thought I was just leftover baggage. Something you clear out before the big IPO pitch. What she didn't get. I wasn't leftover. I was leverage. And the moment she gave me that smile, the one that said she'd already picked out the date I'd be let go, I started counting down. They called it a strategic pivot, but it felt more like they were shoving me out of a moving truck, waving from the cab like it was all part of the plan. That first week, my internal roles began shifting. The systems I'd always monitored from end to end, suddenly I couldn't get in. First, the registry interface. Then the analytics dashboard. Then version control. One by one, access denied. Not all at once, of course. That would have been too obvious. Too aggressive. This was death by permissions. Slow, quiet, and methodical. The new CTO showed up like some over-caffeinated grad student playing CEO on startup day. He hadn't even unpacked a single box before launching into buzzword soup. Agile modularity. Elastic CI/CD scaffolds. I asked him one question, just one, about the governance layer he planned to use for warehouse rollouts. He stared at me like I'd asked him to recite the periodic table backward. He wore white sneakers with a navy suit and came from a background in social metrics. I looked him up later. His last big idea? A gamified loyalty app for frozen yogurt shops. And now he was in charge of rewriting the core routing logic for our international supply chain. Procurement stopped including me in renewal threads. My signature? Suddenly optional. Engineers I'd mentored from their very first builds couldn't even look me in the eye. And Vanya's assistant, you know the type, one of those designer names that sound like a Scandinavian lamp brand, Kalira or something, started filtering my calendar invites. Claimed it was about executive bandwidth, whatever that means. Then HR pinged me to schedule a collaboration dynamics refresher. I didn't even bother replying. And through all of it, I didn't say a word. I watched. I kept notes. Because I knew something they didn't. Map and Core, the very thing that made Neuralien tick, the piece that turned logistical chaos into near-perfect optimization, that wasn't just buried in the codebase anymore. It was locked inside a multi-layer custodial framework. One I personally helped design after the licensing scare in 2016. It had its own key structure, its own cert chain, and a private registrar tied to a trust that required 3 signatures. One of those, mine. And unless I dropped dead or signed it away myself, it wasn't going anywhere. No one ever asked me about it. Not once. They thought they were phasing me out, leaning into a shiny new system with slick UI and buzzwords. But they weren't upgrading anything. They were quietly unplugging themselves from the only framework that actually worked. Every system Vanya killed had one unspoken dependency. Mappin, her sleek new vertical future, was standing on a foundation she hadn't even seen. It was like watching someone rip out the walls of their house because the wallpaper looked old. Totally unaware they were pulling out the support beams. So I tracked everything. Every tool they dropped. Every approval they skipped. Every signature they rerouted. Because when things started breaking, and I knew they would, I wanted a clean record. They thought the shift was theirs to control. What they didn't know was that I'd already started making my own. Then came the invite. That red flag calendar ping with no subject, no agenda, just mandatory attendance. And I knew, there's a special kind of corporate dread that hits when they don't even bother with fake pleasantries. No talk of strategic alignment or future vision. Just dead air and an empty subject line. I wore black that day. Not to make a statement, just to mark the ending. At exactly 3:07 p.m., Vanya appeared on screen. Like the dramatic villain reveal in some overproduced tech drama. Studio lighting, high-end mic, that polished TED Talk tone like she was about to pitch a wellness app instead of read off a kill list. I believe in clean slates, she began, with a smile so frozen it could have been trademarked. And today we're starting fresh. She didn't even flinch. Effective immediately, we are parting ways with several legacy contributors who no longer fit the future of Neuralien. Then she dropped the name like she was reading off a dinner special. Jason Fell is among them. Jason was our back-end architect. Quiet guy. Brilliant. The one who built the load distribution matrix that Mappin still leaned on when everything else failed. Never missed a review cycle. Never made noise. His name came and went in a blink, offered up like some token sacrifice to the gods of disruption. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just next. I was already done. I didn't wait for confirmation. Didn't need it. I was the opening act. So I didn't say a word. Didn't raise a hand. I just reached beside me, picked up my badge and held it up to the webcam. Let it dangle there for a moment, long enough for everyone to see it. Then I laid it flat on my desk, centered like a piece of evidence, and stood. No speech. No final message. Just the sound of my chair sliding back. And then I walked out of frame. By 3:20 p.m. I was locked out. Slack? Gone. GitHub? Disabled. Confluence? Dead. I'll give them this, they moved fast. In under 15 minutes it was like I'd never existed. Except I had. And not just in some login database or permissions table. I still existed in the root ledger. See, when you build something that matters, something essential, the most important pieces don't live in the spotlight. They're buried deep, under redundancy layers, wrapped in logic most execs don't even know to check. Air-gapped. Safeguarded. Quiet. I didn't need my badge anymore. Because the system still recognized mine. Mappin's licensing registrar? Still pointed to the private LLC I controlled. The last cert rotation? Still stamped with my blockchain node. And the API dependency tree? Half of it couldn't even load unless it passed through an escrow token I generated. On a machine Vanya had no clue existed. Sure, they could wipe me from payroll. Delete my profile. Pretend I was never part of the picture. But you can't erase what you never understood. They fired me from the company. But not from the foundation it still relied on. I didn't break down. Didn't scream. Didn't even head home. Instead, I took the exit off I-25 without thinking. Muscle memory. toward the old industrial park where Norellian used to rent its first floor. There, tucked in the back, was a storage unit still under my name, or at least a name. One tied to the secondary entity Marshall and I had formed back when redundancy wasn't an insult, but a plan. Unit B14. Plain. No windows. Cement walls that didn't care about layoffs or trending hashtags. I flipped open the keypad marked NorMD Escrow Services and punched in the old code. Inside sat my rig. No frills. No portability. Just raw defense. Battery backups, air-gapped processors, and zero Wi-Fi unless I connected it manually. Some folks build bunkers with food and water. I built mine in code. Fired it up. Logged in. 3 levels deep, token biometric key phrase. Then I opened the ledger. Mappin Core had been quietly running in production for 8 years straight. Every routing adjustment. Every load time optimization. Every overflow alert. All of it pulsed through that system like blood through veins. It wasn't just code. It was the nervous system. And while they prettied up the interface, rerouted the dashboards, and quietly shut down the old monitoring tools, the core, the heartbeat, was still mine. I ran the script. It wasn't a virus. No malware. Nothing destructive. It was a clean, notarized reassignment. The root registrar shifted back to the trust. Core license keys revoked and reissued. New tokens flagged with escrow-based authentication. Certificate authorities rolled over to fresh signers. And every piece of the infrastructure that depended on that core, it started pinging a door I had just quietly locked. No crash. No alerts. Mappin Core just went still. Like a pianist who lifts their hands from the keys mid-song. The silence didn't scream. It echoed. It wasn't gone. It wasn't broken. It was just asleep. Because when you fire the one person holding the key, and never bother to legally transfer ownership, what you're left with isn't sabotage. It's gravity. And when I shut the lid on that rig, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel victorious. What I felt was the weight returning to where it always belonged. Norellian's leadership had convinced themselves the system was theirs. That they owned it, ran it, controlled it. But it had always been mine to stabilize. Mine to authorize. Mine to keep breathing. And now, it simply stopped catching them. The foundation didn't crack. It stepped aside. At 4:12 p.m. the first alert came in. A major client in Chicago, a Fortune 100 distribution center, flagged the routing API. License rejected. Normally that's just a sync issue. A delay. Something you refresh and move on from. But this time the call didn't time out. It died. No fallback. No degraded mode. Just nothing. At 4:17 p.m., another internal alert. Warehouse dashboards along the western corridor, Boise, Albuquerque, Temecula, all turned red. Not because the servers failed, but because permissions did. Their routing engines couldn't access the predictive load tables. No forecast. No automation. That meant dispatching by hand. That meant hours of backlog. That meant missed delivery windows. At 4:23 p.m., the CTO jumped on an internal call, smug as ever, and said, "Looks like a cert expiration. We'll roll it forward." Greg, junior engineer, solid guy, I mentored him during his first integration sprint, muted and unmuted 3 times before finally speaking. "Sir, the certs don't expire for another 113 days. I checked the chain myself." The CTO's face twitched. Then he shifted into nonsense, something about handshake bugs, but it was obvious. He had no clue. Then the flood started. Attempts to reach the root registrar? Blocked. DevOps tried to push a DNS refresh. Locked out. Legal attempted to verify license ownership in the latest update file. Only to find the file path now led to a dead subdomain. Even the Zoom call started freezing for a few participants. Azure flagged 3 authentication anomalies. Different IPs, different states. Multi-factor auth failed on one of the senior engineers. By 4:47 p.m., they were scrambling. At 4:53 p.m., someone from the executive assistant pool reached out to the client liaison team, told them to prep a holding statement. But it never got sent. Because at exactly 5 p.m., the automated client portal triggered its last resort failover protocol. The top 5 clients, collectively worth tens of millions in ARR, received the same message. Operational disruption under review. Please stand by for license reassignment clarification. That message wasn't generic. I wrote it because every system at Norellian had a roadmap. Every incident had a flowchart. Every dependency had an owner. But this vault, the one tied to the custodial trust, was never listed in the internal wiki. No registry entry. No index page. It didn't exist on paper because Marshall and I built it that way. Designed it to vanish until the exact moment it was needed. And now? It was needed. They scrambled. Spun up incident rooms, threw together war room calls and RACI charts, looped in overpriced consultants like that would help. But none of it mattered. Because they were chasing a door that didn't have hinges. A system without a login screen. A foundation they didn't even realize was holding up the building. They thought they could shove the old guard out and run the company on buzzwords and good vibes. But they never asked the most dangerous question in ops. Who holds the keys? And now? They were standing outside a house they never knew they didn't own. The emergency operations call was like watching an autopsy in real time. Except the patient was still twitching, and no one wanted to admit who had held the knife. It was 9:41 p.m. in Denver. Everyone looked wrecked. Sleeves rolled, ties loose, foreheads shiny from hours of circling the same dead-end conversations. Someone was literally Googling custodial license recovery protocol, like it was a plug-and-play fix. Vanya had slipped into crisis mode. Hair down, glasses on, playing calm and in control, even as she repeated phrases like business continuity and strategic alignment, like they were magic spells that could undo the gridlock. The CTO, still didn't know his name, was half whispering to someone off camera, probably begging some junior developer to remember how the old staging scripts were structured. And then Dana leaned forward. Dana from compliance. One of the last people still standing from Marshall's original crew. She hadn't said much all night. Just watched. Took it all in. The kind of silence that comes from someone who doesn't guess because they already know. I have a question, she said, voice steady, quiet, and sharp. Everyone froze. Even Vanya stopped mid-buzzword. Dana didn't raise her voice. Didn't flinch. She just stared straight into the camera like she was giving testimony, not asking a question. Who currently holds the credentials to MapinCore's trust chain? No one answered. The CTO glanced off to the side like legal might save him. But legal's screens all went dark at once, mics muted. Everyone ducking behind the firewall of plausible deniability. Vanya blinked. Opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Dana didn't blink. Because if that asset is tied to an irrevocable custodial trust, and I believe it is, then unless a notarized transfer was logged and filed, we don't own it. Silence. No excuses. No pushback. Just oxygen leaving the room. She let the moment stretch. Then she delivered the line that finally shattered the illusion they'd been clinging to. You need to call her. That word her hit like a hammer. Not legal. Not the CTO. Not Vanya. Me. And right then it all clicked. The whole picture. This wasn't an attack. It wasn't sabotage. No one had breached the system. The trust didn't break. They did. They triggered the shutdown by firing the only person who could authorize the continuation. They didn't lose the foundation. They let it walk out the door. It wasn't taken. It was reclaimed. By someone who never really left, just stepped far enough back to let them dig their own grave in peace. They didn't lose control of Mapin. They never had it to begin with. The first message hit my phone at 10:22 p.m. Legal. Some junior associate with a shaky voice and a voicemail that cracked halfway through. We're hoping to clarify some asset concerns related to the Mapin stack. If you could, please call us back at your earliest. Click. No number. No callback time. They already knew they were behind the clock. At 11:03 p.m., Vanya's name showed up in my inbox. Subject line. Urgent discussion Legacy infrastructure. The body was 4 sentences long. All boardroom fluff. Called me a valued contributor to Norellian's growth, and asked if I'd be willing to collaborate toward a swift and mutually beneficial resolution. I read it twice. She still didn't use my name. I closed the email. Didn't reply. By midnight, the exec chain's whisper network was bleeding confusion. Earlier that week, the merger team had submitted a due diligence packet, $270 million on the table from Halstead Industries. All of it contingent on verified ownership of Norelion's core IP and routing assets. Pretty standard clause. Basic risk coverage. What they didn't see coming was Dana's filing. At 12:41 a.m., she uploaded it straight into the shared deal room. Core optimization system Mappin Core is currently held in an irrevocable custodial trust. Access and ownership not formally transferred to Norelion at time of last trustee dismissal. That single paragraph lit the whole room on fire. Halstead's legal team flagged the document within the hour. They didn't panic yet, but the tone changed fast. Now it was asset exposure, chain of title, potential non-performance. I watched it unfold in real time from the audit mirror I'd embedded 4 years ago. It was meant for compliance testing, just a little tool to monitor record integrity across systems. But tonight, it was my front row seat to the fallout. At 2:38 a.m., a password reset attempt pinged my secondary email. Their third try that night. The tag told me it came from a device tied to their Azure admin node. They were trying to sneak in using old access trails, hoping I'd left a backdoor cracked. I hadn't, as I didn't need to. There was nothing left for them to recover. Nothing broken. Nothing lost. Just nothing they ever owned. Mappin Core wasn't compromised. It wasn't under attack. No data had been stolen. Simply wasn't theirs. Maybe it never had been. They built their empire on ground they never deeded. And now the title had surfaced. This wasn't a revocation. It was a revelation. At 6:12 a.m., my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in nearly a year. Marshall. The last time I'd heard from him was at his farewell party. The one where he passed out custom whiskey tumblers and told everyone, "Take care of the house." He hadn't meant the office. He meant the system. The soul. His voice was tired but steady. "You really held on to the vault?" I didn't hesitate. I held it until someone trustworthy arrived. He gave that gravel-drag chuckle I remembered from tense board meetings. But this one didn't last long. "Can it be transferred?" "Yes," I said. "With consent." A pause. "Not just yours." "No," I told him. "Not anymore." At 7:03 a.m., Vanya's assistant sent over a draft agreement. The subject line was resolution path. The body read like someone had been coached to sound cooperative, but couldn't quite bury the condescension. It kicked off with legal jargon, tiptoed through some cherry-picked performance metrics, and wrapped up with a closing line that tried real hard to sound gracious. "We appreciate your past contributions and hope you'll support the transition for the good of the company." As if they were offering me a favor. As if coming back to clean up their mess was some noble act of teamwork. I didn't even bother marking it up. I just forwarded it back untouched with one sentence. "Incorrect premise. I'm not your asset to negotiate." Then I attached the original custodial charter, time-stamped, notarized, and signed back in 2017, and sent it directly to Halstead's legal team. Let the grown-ups take it from there. By 9 a.m., Halstead's general counsel had reviewed the whole thing. I could practically hear the pen tapping through the screen as they worked through the fine print. And when they got to the key section, page 6 halfway down under subsection 4.2.3, they hit the line that cracked it all open. In the event of custodial reassignment, no transfer shall be enforceable following involuntary termination of the active trustee, unless accompanied by formal release documentation signed by said trustee and countersigned by founding entity or successor with full fiduciary standing. Translation: you fire the trustee, you lose the keys. No loopholes. No override. No backup admin could waltz in with token access and fake authority. This wasn't about systems anymore. It was about signatures. Halstead froze everything. The deal. The announcements. The entire rollout. They called for a private session, urgent, internal, high-level only. Legal. Compliance. Marshall. And me. Same exact time as the scheduled acquisition call. I didn't prep. Didn't need to. There was nothing left to justify. No feelings left to untangle. Just infrastructure. Just leverage. Vanya had tried to build her shiny new future by burning the scaffolding that held it up. Now if she wanted to move forward, she'd have to crawl back through the wreckage. Barefoot. The screen came alive like a stage light rising. Clean white background, Halstead logos lined up neatly, and a panel of tense executives trying their best to pretend they weren't sitting in a 5-alarm fire. Halstead's chair opened with the usual introductions. Polite practiced. But the tension in the room? You could cut it with a stylus. Everyone on Norelian's side looked like they hadn't slept. Rumpled collars. Tight jaws. That hollow-eyed glaze that follows an all-nighter fueled by panic and bad decisions. Except for Vanya. She looked untouched. Pressed blazer. Hair pulled back into her signature LinkedIn bun. The one she used for shareholder calls and investor summits. She had that poised, unshaken look. Like she still thought she could finesse the landing. She greeted the chair calmly. Like nothing had happened. Like the system behind her wasn't already on fire. And now, the chair said, smiling just enough to show restraint, let's introduce the custodial majority holder of Map and Core, per yesterday's legal confirmation. And there it was. The moment. I clicked on my camera. No introduction. No fanfare. Just me, neutral background, no distractions, every receipt sitting quiet behind the look on my face. Vanya didn't move at first. Then her jaw twitched. No, she whispered. Not to anyone. Just a raw instinct, a breathless little crack in her foundation. That's impossible. I nodded once. Calm. Good morning. She blinked. Lips parted. But there was nothing left in her script. No speech. No pivot. No next slide. Just the truth. The control she thought she had? It was never hers. And across the screen Dana sat still. Didn't smirk. Didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She looked at me with that quiet, steady kind of gaze. The kind that belongs to someone who's waited patiently for the world to right itself. Then she gave a slow blink. Not dramatic. Not smug. Just final. A nod in another language. One that meant finally. I opened the notarization interface. Uploaded the digital release. Escrow-backed, time-stamped, sealed tight with a single non-negotiable condition. Custodial transfer authorized only upon the immediate resignation of Vanya Keel from all executive roles. No reinstatement, no advisory title, no side door consultancy. Verbal or written. The room went still. The chair glanced over at Halstead's legal rep. One nod. That's all it took. No discussion. No negotiation. The condition is accepted, the chair said. I clicked submit. And just like that, access keys restored. API routes reactivated. Dashboard latency dropped to 0, across 5 continents, in under 12 seconds. Norelian's pulse came back online. Not because they solved anything, but because I allowed it. Later, someone from Halstead reached out. Wanted to schedule a follow-up. To explore potential advisory roles moving forward. I told them to put it in writing. And send it to my firm now operating under its own banner. I called it Map and Legacy. That afternoon, Vanya vanished from the press release. No goodbye post. No curated farewell photo. Just a silent deletion, like a mistake someone finally stopped pretending wasn't there. They thought they were trimming dead weight. Thought I was just some artifact from a slower, outdated chapter. But I wasn't legacy. I was escrow.